The air in Manhattan had that crisp edge of early autumn, and Damian Walsh barely noticed the blur of yellow taxis or the buzz of the crowd as he strode down Fifth Avenue. His polished leather shoes tapped a steady rhythm on the pavement, each step a silent attempt to release the anger boiling inside him. At 32, he was the youngest CEO in the history of Walsh Enterprises, a giant in the financial world. But today, his empire felt no more solid than a castle made of sand. The board meeting had been a disaster. "Get married, Damien," they'd said, their tone dripping with condescension. "Settle down, project stability, or we'll vote you out." A clear ultimatum: find a wife within a few months or lose control of the empire he had built from scratch. His jaw tightened at the memory. Marriage. As if his personal life was just another bargaining chip to win their trust. He'd spent years crafting the image of an invincible man, cold, calculating, untouchable, and now they wanted him to parade a wife around like some trophy to appease shareholders. The absurdity of it made his blood boil. He needed air, space, something to drown out the noise in his head. That's when he saw it. A small, modest coffee shop wedged between a bank and a boutique. The sign read, "The Daily Grind." Without thinking, he pushed through the glass door. The little bell overhead jingled, and the rich scent of roasted coffee hit him like a sedative. The place was simple. Wooden tables, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu scrawled in messy handwriting. It was a far cry from the sterile boardrooms he usually dominated, and for a fleeting moment, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Behind the counter, a young woman worked with near-reverent focus, her dark hair pulled into a messy high ponytail, a green apron tied around her waist. She was pouring an espresso, completely unaware of his presence. Damien stepped forward, his patience already wearing thin. "Large black coffee, no sugar," he said curtly, wallet already in hand. The girl, her name tag read Tessa, looked up, her sharp hazel eyes assessing him. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice gentle but laced with something he couldn't place. Sarcasm, maybe. The question caught him off guard. "Something like that," he muttered, not in the mood for small talk. He slid a 20 across the counter, eyes drifting toward the window where the city pulsed with life. Tessa didn't touch the money. Instead, she leaned her elbows on the counter and studied him like a puzzle. People who order black coffee like that are usually either trying to prove something or running from something. Which are you? Damien's eyes snapped back to hers, narrowing. "What did you just say?" She shrugged, unfazed, and turned to start making his coffee. "Just an observation. You look like your world's on fire. I'm curious." He stared at her, unsure if he was more annoyed or intrigued. No one talked to him like this. Not employees, not rivals, not even the board members who'd ambushed him. Her audacity was almost refreshing. "You always psychoanalyze your customers?" he asked, his voice dry, but the edge had softened. "Only the ones who look like they're about to punch a wall," she replied, tamping the coffee with practiced precision. "So what's got you so wound up? Bad date? Market crash?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." She pushed the coffee toward him, steam curling into the air, and leaned back with a tilt of her head, daring him. For a second, he considered walking out. He owed this woman nothing, least of all an explanation. But there was something about her, the way her eyes didn't flinch, how she stood her ground, that made him pause. Maybe it was the anonymity of the moment, or maybe he just needed to vent. "The board thinks I need a wife to stabilize my image," he said, the words bitter on his tongue, "as if I'm some reckless kid who can't be trusted." Tessa raised her eyebrows, wiping her hands on her apron. "Wow, that's archaic. What's next? A dowry and a horse?" He snorted, surprised by himself. "Close. They want the wedding done by spring, or I'm out." She gave a low whistle, grabbing a rag to wipe the counter. "So what's the plan? Snatch a random girl off the street and drag her to the altar? Solid strategy." "I don't want to marry anyone," he snapped, louder than he intended. A couple at a nearby table glanced over, and he lowered his voice. "This is a power play. They're testing me." Tessa nodded, her expression softening. "Sounds like a cage. Fancy, but still a cage." She paused, then added, Ever thought about not playing their game? He blinked, surprised again. What do you mean? Like, what's the point of all this? She gestured vaguely at his suit, his posture, his entire existence. You're breaking yourself for people who don't even respect you. Maybe the answer isn't winning their game. Maybe it's rewriting the rules. Damien stared at her, coffee untouched. Her words hit harder than he cared to admit. He'd spent years climbing, fighting, outlasting. But this girl, a stranger in a coffee shop, had just summed up the emptiness of it all in one breath. He didn't know whether to be impressed or irritated. You talk like you've figured life out, he said, a hint of challenge in his voice. What's your grand philosophy? Quit your job and live in a van? Tessa laughed, a clear, unguarded sound that loosened something in his chest. No, I'm not that enlightened, but I think life's too short to let other people pull the strings. You only get one shot. Why waste it on a script that isn't yours? He didn't answer right away, just watched her as she turned to help another customer. Her movements quick but purposeful. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience that didn't scream for attention. She wasn't polished or showy, but she was real, more real than anyone he'd met in a long time. And then, like a spark in the dark, an idea hit him, a wild, reckless idea. Hey, he called, cutting through the cafe's noise. She turned, eyebrows raised. What if I did pick someone random off the street, he said. Hypothetically. Tessa froze, then turned fully to face him, arms crossed. Hypothetically, I'd say you're out of your damn mind. I'm serious. He leaned in, voice low and steady. What if I offered you a deal? 6 months. You pretend to be my wife. I'll make it worth your while. No strings, no emotions, just business. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? His gaze didn't waver, though his heart pounded. He wasn't sure why he was doing this. Maybe desperation, maybe the fire in her. But the words kept coming. Name your price. Whatever you want, I can cover it. Tessa stared at him, unreadable. For a moment he thought she'd laugh or throw the coffee in his face, but instead she leaned forward, her voice calm but steely. Listen, Mr. CEO, I don't know what kind of rom-com fantasy you're living in, but I'm not a prop for your boardroom drama. I have a life, I have bills, I have a mom who needs me. I'm not for sale. He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. And another thing, she said, pointing at him, if you're going to propose something that insane, at least know my name. I'm Tessa, not Hey You or Coffee Girl. Tessa Hart. She grabbed the 20 from the counter and shoved it back toward him. Coffee's on the house. Take your crisis somewhere else. Damien stood there stunned as she turned and resumed taking orders. He'd been rejected, cleanly, unequivocally, and with a spark that left him dazed. For the first time all day, he felt something besides rage, curiosity. Tessa Hart wasn't just a barista. She was a storm. And as he left the cafe, coffee in hand, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't done with her. Tessa Hart stood behind the coffee counter, the warm yellow light of the daily grind casting a soft glow over her hands as she wiped away every stubborn coffee stain from the surface. It had been 3 days since that strange encounter with the arrogant CEO Damien Walsh, and she still couldn't shake the way he'd looked at her, like she was the answer to a question he hadn't yet figured out. His proposal, a fake marriage for 6 months, still echoed in her mind. Ridiculous, and yet haunting. She shook her head, telling herself it had been nothing more than a twisted joke from a bored billionaire. But deep down, a sliver of unease remained. Not because of him, but because of herself, for that fleeting moment when she'd thought, what if it were real? She didn't have time for foolish thoughts. Her evening shift would end at 10, and then she needed to rush to the hospital to visit her mom. Helen, her mother, had grown weaker in recent months. The lung condition made it hard for her to breathe without machines. Every time Tessa saw her lying in that hospital bed, something in her chest tightened. She'd done everything, picked up double shifts, slashed every expense, even sold the heirloom ring her grandmother had left her. But the medical bills still piled up like a mountain. She couldn't lose her mother. Not when she was the one person who'd always believed in her. even when Tessa had stopped believing in herself after that heartbreak years ago. The bell on the door jingled, snapping her out of her thoughts. She looked up, ready to flash a polite smile. But the smile froze the moment she saw who walked in: Damian Walsh. Still in his expensive suit, though this time he looked less tense and more determined. She instinctively gripped the cloth tighter in her hand as he strode straight to the counter, eyes locked on her. "Tessa Hart," he said, his voice low and clear. "I need to talk to you." She crossed her arms, tilting her head. "If this is about that fake marriage again, the door's that way. I'm not interested." He didn't smile, but a slight smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, as if her bluntness was exactly what he'd expected. "5 minutes. Hear me out. If you still want me to leave after that, I will, and I won't come back." She studied him, searching for signs of a prank, but all she saw was unwavering seriousness. She glanced at the clock. 15 minutes left on her shift. "5 minutes," she said, nodding toward an empty table in the corner. "But I'm not promising anything." They sat across from each other, tension thick between them. Damien got straight to the point. "I've thought this through. That offer I made the other day wasn't a joke. I need a wife, on paper, to keep my CEO position. 6 months, no more. You'll have everything you need: money, housing, anything. Then we go our separate ways." Tessa let out a dry laugh and shook her head. "Who do you think I am? Some desperate girl willing to sell her life to a stranger? You've got the whole of Manhattan out there. Find someone else." "I don't want someone else," he replied, voice firm. "I want you. You're sharp, grounded, not tied to my world. You're the only person I trust to do this without turning it into a mess." She raised an eyebrow, equal parts annoyed and intrigued. "Is that a compliment, or are you just trying to flatter me?" "It's not flattery," he said, leaning in slightly, his eyes steady on hers. "I saw how you stood up to me that day. You weren't scared. You didn't fake it. That's exactly what I need. Name your price, Tessa. I know you have a reason to at least consider it." That last sentence made her freeze. He didn't know anything about her, but the way he said it, as if he could feel the weight she carried, shook her. She stood up, returning to the counter to hide her wavering expression. "You don't understand me, and I don't need your money." Damien didn't leave. He stayed right there, waiting until her shift ended. When Tessa removed her apron and stepped outside, he was still by the door, his breath fogging in the cold night air. "Just think about it," he said, handing her a business card. "Call me if you change your mind." She took the card, tempted to tear it up in his face, but for some reason she shoved it into her pocket instead. "Don't expect anything," she said, then turned and disappeared into the night. That night Tessa didn't sleep. She sat beside her mother's hospital bed, the blue light from the machines casting an eerie glow over Helen's pale face. The doctor had spoken with her earlier, his voice soft but merciless. "Without a new treatment plan, she only has a few months left." The cost of that plan was a number she couldn't even bear to imagine. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, far more than she could make in years. She held her mother's frail hand, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "What do I do, Mom?" she whispered, knowing there'd be no answer. In that moment of quiet desperation, Damian Walsh's business card in her pocket felt impossibly heavy. His offer returned, not laughable now, but dangerously tempting. Just 6 months. Just a contract. She could save her mother, give her a chance to live. The next morning she called him. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "If I agree, I want 2 things. 1, I need full payment for my mother's treatment. All of it. Not a cent left unpaid. 2, this is strictly a contract. No emotions, no interference in my life, and no one knows the truth." Damien answered immediately without hesitation. "Agreed. I'll have the legal contract drafted. Would you like to meet with my lawyer?" "No need," she said, her voice hardening. "I trust you'll keep your word, but if you break it, I'll make you regret it." He let out a soft chuckle over the phone, both admiring and amused. "I don't doubt that for a second, Tessa Hart." 1 week later, everything moved like a whirlwind. The contract was signed in Damien's law office, so luxurious that Tessa felt completely out of place in her old sweater. She read every line carefully, making sure the terms were clear. 6 months living as husband and wife, public appearances when necessary, and afterward, freedom. Damien had already transferred a large sum to the hospital, enough to begin her mother's treatment. When Tessa saw the account balance, she almost cried. But she held it in. She didn't want him to see her vulnerable. The wedding was private, just a witness and an officiant. Tessa wore a simple white dress Damien had sent. It wasn't extravagant, but it fit her perfectly. Damien, in his black suit, looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, but the way he looked at her wasn't smug like she'd expected. It was deeper, like he was trying to understand her. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Tessa felt a chill crawl down her spine. She looked at Damien, now her husband in name, and reminded herself, this is just a deal. Don't forget that. But when he gently took her hand and led her out of the room, she couldn't deny a strange feeling rising in her chest, like she had just stepped into a game far more dangerous than she thought. Damien Walsh's penthouse sat atop a gleaming glass tower in the heart of Manhattan, where the city lights stretched out below like a sparkling carpet. Tessa Hart stood by the living room window, hands clasped tightly, doing her best not to be overwhelmed by the luxury. The space was expansive, with soaring ceilings, minimalist yet undeniably expensive decor, and a glass wall that offered a panoramic view of the skyline. This wasn't her home. This was a stage where she would play the role of Mrs. Walsh for 6 months. She reminded herself of that every day, like a mantra to hold the boundary firm. The first week of living together was a clumsy dance between two strangers. Tessa kept her distance, showing up only when necessary and spending most of her time at the hospital with her mother. Damien, on the other hand, buried himself in work, coming home late with a face worn from fatigue, but still sharp as ever. Their communication was minimal, consisting of brief functional exchanges. There's food in the fridge. Thanks. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Nothing more. But even in the silence, Tessa felt his gaze, quick glances when she cleared the dinner table, or when she accidentally smiled at a text from a coworker. She told herself it was just curiosity, nothing more. One evening, she was rearranging the books on the living room shelves, a habit to kill time, when Damien walked in, sleeves rolled up, a glass of wine in hand. He paused, watching her move thick finance books to a lower shelf, replacing them with a few worn novels she had brought from home. "What are you doing?" he asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Just organizing things to make them easier to find," she replied without looking up. "Your books are all charts and numbers. Gives me a headache. I figured you might want to change of pace." He raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. "A change of pace? You think I have time to read Pride and Prejudice?" Tessa shrugged, a faint smile flickering. "Maybe. It might teach you how not to irritate someone on the very first meeting." Damien laughed, a rare sound that made Tessa freeze for a second. She quickly turned away, pretending to focus on the shelf, but her heart skipped a beat. "Don't read into it," she told herself, but she couldn't deny that he was looking at her. Not with arrogance this time, but with genuine curiosity. The real shift came one afternoon when Damien's mother, Eleanor, paid an unexpected visit. Tessa was in the kitchen, baking a batch of cookies using her mother's old recipe, the scent of vanilla drifting through the penthouse. Eleanor, a poised woman with silver hair and a neat bun, walked in and was instantly drawn to the smell. "You must be Tessa?" she asked, her sharp eyes observant but not cold. "Yes, I'm Damien's wife," Tessa answered, her voice hesitant. The word wife still felt foreign on her tongue. Eleanor smiled and sat at the kitchen counter. "I heard you work at a coffee shop, but this," she gestured toward the baking tray, "this doesn't taste like something made by a barista." Tessa blushed, unused to compliments. "I learned from my mom. She loved to bake, though she can't anymore." She shared stories easily, of childhood days spent in a tiny kitchen, of rolling dough and adding a pinch of salt to balance the sweetness. Eleanor listened, asked questions, and for the first time Tessa felt like she wasn't performing. When Damien came home, he found his mother laughing at a story Tessa had told, the two women chatting like old friends. "You picked a good one," Eleanor whispered to Damien as she was leaving, clearly pleased. Damien didn't respond, but his gaze lingered on Tessa longer than usual. From that day forward, Tessa began leaving her quiet mark on the penthouse. She reorganized the fridge, labeled the spice jars, and even placed a small potted plant on the windowsill. Damien didn't say anything, but she noticed he started eating the meals she prepared, even if it was just a salad or a bowl of soup. One day she found a small note on the kitchen counter. "Soup was good. Thanks." Just 3 words, but they made her smile, though she quickly reminded herself not to feel anything. Damien, for his part, began to realize that Tessa was nothing like the people in his world. She wasn't dazzled by the penthouse or interested in jewelry and designer clothes. She did things with quiet sincerity, from checking in on his mother to tidying up after a long day. He started noticing the little things. The way she folded the blanket on the couch, the crease in her brow when she read the news, the soft hum of an old melody when she thought no one was listening. Each detail was a puzzle piece, and he wanted to know more. One night, Tessa was seated at the dining table, reviewing her mother's hospital bills on her laptop. Damien walked in, still in his suit, hair slightly tousled. "It's late," he said gently. "Why aren't you asleep?" She closed the laptop and gave a tired smile. "Just going over a few things. What about you? Another late meeting?" He nodded, sitting across from her. "They wanted me to stay for networking, but I wasn't in the mood." He paused, then asked, "How's your mom?" The question caught Tessa off guard. She studied him, looking for insincerity, but all she saw was quiet concern. "Better," she said softly. "Thanks to you. The money you sent, it's helping." Damien gave a short nod, saying nothing more, but the air between them felt lighter, less guarded. For the first time, they weren't just two people stuck in a contract. They were two people trying to understand each other. As Tessa stood to head to bed, Damien said, almost without thinking, "You're not like anyone I've ever met, Tessa." She paused, heart thudding, then replied simply, "I hope that's a good thing." And she walked away, leaving Damien alone with his thoughts. The Walsh Enterprises Gala was held at a 5-star hotel, where crystal chandeliers cast glittering reflections onto the marble floor. Tessa stood in front of the mirror in the dressing room, trying to adjust to the unfamiliar reflection staring back at her. A deep, sapphire evening gown hugging her figure, soft waves in her hair, and heels that made her feel like she was floating. It was her first appearance as Mrs. Walsh, and despite all the mental preparation, she still felt like a fish thrown out of water. Damien was waiting for her at the door, his black tuxedo making him look like he'd walked out of a movie. He extended his hand, his gaze flickering over her with a hint of surprise. "You look very presentable," he said, calm as always, but something in his voice made her blush. "Presentable is good enough," she replied, taking his hand for balance. "But if I fall in these heels, you'll have to explain it to the whole room." He gave a soft chuckle, guiding her toward the elevator. "I'll catch you. Don't worry." Inside the ballroom, opulence filled the air. Men in tailored suits and women in flowing gowns moved with the ease of those used to being on display. Tessa felt eyes turning toward her, the nameless girl who'd suddenly become Damien Walsh's wife. She gripped his arm tighter and reminded herself to breathe. "It's just a performance," she told herself. Damien introduced her to his associates, his tone smooth but not overbearing. Tessa quickly noticed he was trying to keep her in a safe circle, only introducing her to those with friendly faces. But when a group of older investors surrounded them, she knew she couldn't stay quiet. One of them, Mr. Harrison, asked with a slightly patronizing tone, "So, what did you do before marrying Damien?" "I heard you were a waitress?" Tessa smiled, unfazed. "I worked at a coffee shop, yes, but I don't think a job defines a person. I learned to read people by how they order, how they drink their coffee. It's more useful than you might think." Mr. Harrison raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised by her answer. Damien glanced at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. The conversation shifted, and Tessa took the lead, answering questions with natural poise. She told a funny story about a difficult customer at the cafe, making the group laugh. When the topic turned to markets and trends, she offered an observation about young consumer behavior, based on what she'd noticed from her regulars. The investors nodded, impressed. As they stepped aside for a drink break, Damien leaned in and murmured, "You just shut Harrison up. That's no small feat." Tessa shrugged, sipping her champagne. "I was just being honest. They're not as intimidating as you make them out to be." But as the evening went on, Tessa realized that pretending wasn't so simple. Damien stayed close, his hand occasionally resting on the small of her back, his gaze softer when introducing her. There were moments when she forgot it was all fake, when he laughed at her joke, when he gently pulled her away from a boring conversation. She felt her heart beating faster, and that scared her. Near the end of the event, a reporter approached them, asking about their love story. Tessa froze, but Damien answered smoothly, "We met by chance, and I just knew she was the one." He looked at her as he said it, and for a second Tessa almost believed him. On the ride home, she stared out the window, trying to hide the whirlwind inside her. Damien broke the silence. "You did great. You had the whole room wrapped around your finger." "Thanks," she said quietly, "but you didn't have to overdo it. You looked at me like—" She hesitated. "Like I was actually your wife." He was silent for a moment before replying, "Maybe I wasn't acting, Tessa." She turned to him, heart pounding, but said nothing. The car moved through the city night, and Tessa knew, no matter how hard she tried, the line between real and pretend was beginning to blur. Morning at Damien Walsh's penthouse began with soft golden light streaming through the glass windows, but Tessa Hart felt none of its warmth. She stood in the kitchen, mechanically brewing coffee, her mind tangled after weeks of tense cohabitation. Living this pretend life with Damien was becoming more difficult, not because of the contract, but because of the emotions that kept sneaking in uninvited. Every glance, every unintentional touch from him forced her to remind herself, this isn't real, but her heart, once broken, wasn't listening. Today was another charity event hosted by Walsh Enterprises, and Tessa knew she had to appear once again in the role of Mrs. Walsh. She had prepared carefully, choosing a simple but elegant pearl-colored silk dress, doing her best to mask the unease in her chest. Damien, as always, looked perfect in a gray suit, but there was something different in his eyes today, a distance that made her uneasy. The event buzzed with light jazz music and polite conversations. Tessa moved beside Damien, smiling on cue, answering small talk with the grace that had become second nature. But then she saw her, a woman approaching them with golden hair and a confident smile. The woman gently touched Damien's arm and said sweetly, "Damien, it's been too long." Tessa felt her heart pause. It was Sophia Langley, a name she'd seen in countless tabloid headlines. Damien's ex-girlfriend, a famous model, and the daughter of a powerful family. Sophia tilted her head slightly, her gaze sliding over Tessa as if she were nothing more than background noise. "You're still as charming as ever," she said, her hand still resting on Damien's arm. "Intimately, too intimately." Damien replied with a polite smile, but he didn't move her hand. "How have you been, Sophia?" he asked, his voice calm but not cold. They began to chat, and Tessa suddenly felt like a third wheel. Sophia spoke of Paris trips, elite parties, and shared memories. Every word reminded Tessa that this woman belonged to Damien's world, a world where Tessa would always be a guest. Quietly, she slipped away, heading toward the bar, trying to mask the ache rising in her chest. What am I even doing, she asked herself. She had no right to feel jealous, no right to be hurt. This was just a contract, and Damien could speak to whoever he wanted. But logic didn't soothe the emptiness inside her. Not when she saw him smiling at Sophia in a way he'd never smiled at her. Finding a quiet corner, Tessa tried to collect herself. That's when one of Damien's newer colleagues, Ethan, a witty software engineer, struck up a conversation. He talked about his new project, joked about computers going rogue, and before she knew it, Tessa was laughing. The sound of her laughter was light but bright enough to catch attention. She didn't notice Damien watching from a distance, his expression darkening as he saw her leaning in, smiling at Ethan. When Ethan left, Damien suddenly appeared beside her. His voice was low and sharp. "You seem to be having a good time with him." Tessa raised her eyebrows, surprised at his tone. He was just talking about work. Is that a problem? No, Damien said, though his jaw clenched. It's just, you don't have to get too friendly with everyone here. She let out a short, humorless laugh, irritation rising. Oh, and what about you? Sophia seemed thrilled to see you. You two looked like you'd never broken up. Damien's eyes narrowed. She's the past. Are you jealous? The question cut like a blade. Tessa felt her face flush, half with anger, half with shame. Jealous? Do you think I have time for that? I'm just doing my role, Damien. Did you expect me to stand there and watch while you and your ex reminisced about your glamorous past? They stared at each other. The air between them pulled tight like a string ready to snap. Damien stepped closer, his voice dropping. You think I want her? You think I'm standing here, doing all of this, for her? For your company, Tessa shot back, her voice louder than she intended. For your CEO title, your board of directors. Don't pretend this is anything else, Damien. His eyes burned into hers. For a moment, she thought he might walk away. But instead, like something invisible pulled him forward, he stepped in, grabbed her shoulders, and before she could react, his lips were on hers. The kiss wasn't gentle, it was fierce, desperate, like he was pouring every bit of frustration, every word left unsaid, into it. Tessa froze, heart hammering. Then against her better judgment, she kissed him back. Her hands gripped his shirt involuntarily, holding on like he was the only thing keeping her grounded. But after just a few seconds, she broke away, breathless and shaken. What are you doing? She whispered, her voice trembling with fury and fear. Damien looked at her, eyes dazed. I don't know. He stepped back, running a hand down his face like he was trying to erase the moment. Neither of them said another word. Tessa turned and walked away, pushing through the ballroom doors into the night, leaving Damien alone with the storm raging inside him. In the days following the kiss, the penthouse became a silent battlefield. Tessa and Damien avoided each other, speaking only when necessary. I'm going to the hospital. I have a meeting. But the air between them was heavy, thick with unspoken emotions neither of them dared to confront. Tessa felt like she was walking a tightrope, each step threatening to plunge her into a freefall. Damien's kiss, it wasn't supposed to happen, but it had changed everything. She could still feel his warmth, the desperation in how he pulled her close, and that terrified her. She wasn't allowed to fall for him. She couldn't let her heart, already broken once, open up again. Tessa tried to focus on her mother, on the part-time shifts she still worked at the coffee shop. But every time she was alone, Damien's image crept in, his eyes when he kissed her, the confusion in his voice when he admitted he didn't know why he did it. She kept asking herself if it meant anything to him, or if it had just been a reckless impulse, a mistake from a man used to being in control. The more she thought about it, the more afraid she became, because she was developing feelings for him, and that violated everything, the contract and the promise she made to herself. One evening, Tessa sat at the dining table, flipping through the legal contract they had signed. She read every clause again, as if hoping to find a loophole. 4 months left. But she wasn't sure she could make it. The thought of leaving early hurt, not just because her mother still needed the treatment money, but because a part of her didn't want to leave Damien, and she hated herself for that. Meanwhile, Damien was fighting his own internal war. He couldn't erase the image of Tessa, her pushing him away, the pain in her eyes, the way she trembled after the kiss. He had never lost control like that, never let emotion override logic. But with Tessa, all his rules had fallen apart. He realized it wasn't just curiosity anymore. He didn't just want her to stay because of the contract. He needed her. She had become a part of his life he couldn't imagine losing. And the thought of her leaving terrified him, a feeling he had never experienced before. One night, while Tessa was cleaning up the dishes after dinner, Damien walked into the kitchen, his eyes heavy with conflict. "We need to talk," he said, voice low but resolute. Tessa froze, her hand tightening around a plate. "About what?" she asked, though she already knew. "About what happened," he said, stepping closer. "About the kiss. About us." She shook her head and turned away. "There is no us, Damien. It was a mistake. You know that." It was real, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I wasn't acting, Tessa. I don't know when it happened, but you're not just part of this contract anymore. I don't want to lose you. His words cut deep, sweet and painful all at once. Tessa turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You're not allowed to say that, she whispered. I can't do this. I can't fall for you and break all over again. I want to walk away, Damien. I'll return the money. I'll find another way. Damien stood frozen, his eyes filled with hurt. You can't leave, he said, his voice hoarse. Not because of the money, because I need you. Not for the company, for me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm not strong enough to play this game, Damien. She stepped past him, rushed to her room, and locked the door behind her, leaving him standing there, heart shattered, with nothing but silence for company. The penthouse, already suffocating with unspoken emotions, had become a fortress of silence after the confrontation between Tessa Hart and Damien Walsh. The kiss, and his confession, still hung between them like a wound left open, refusing to heal. Tessa tried to return to her routines, working shifts at the cafe, visiting her mother at the hospital, but every step felt heavier than the last. She couldn't bring herself to look Damien in the eyes, afraid that his gaze would pull her into a spiral she had no strength to escape. But fate, as always, didn't allow her time to breathe. One morning, while making coffee for a customer, her phone buzzed repeatedly. She glanced at the screen. Damien's number. She hesitated, but the urgency in his stream of messages sent a chill down her spine. Meet me at the office. Now it's serious. She requested to leave her shift early, heart pounding as she jumped into a cab bound for Walsh Enterprises headquarters. Damien was waiting for her in the boardroom, his face taut, eyes clouded with tension. In front of him sat a stack of documents and an open laptop screen, showing an email from a reporter at the Manhattan Chronicle. They know, he said, voice low but sharp. A journalist got hold of information about our marriage contract. They have part of the legal document, no idea how, and they're planning to publish it tomorrow. Tessa felt the blood drain from her face. She dropped into the nearest chair, her hands trembling. How? How did they find out? She whispered, her mind spinning. The contract had been signed under tight confidentiality. Only a handful of people knew the details. But that no longer mattered. Their secret was about to be exposed, and the fallout would be catastrophic. Damien's company could spiral. His carefully built reputation might collapse. And Tessa, she'd be painted as a fraud. I'll handle it, Damien said, though the strain in his voice betrayed him. I've already contacted legal. We'll sue if they publish. But it might be too late. Tessa shook her head, tears threatening. No, Damien. This is my fault. I agreed to this contract. If they want someone to blame, let it be me. I'll say I manipulated you, that I needed the money and forced you into it. Your company doesn't have to suffer. Damien's eyes flared with anger. Are you insane? I'm not letting you do that. This is our issue. No, she shot back, standing suddenly. Her voice shook, but her spine was straight. You paid for my mom's treatment. You kept your word. I won't let you lose everything because of me. I'll talk to the press. I'll take the fall. She turned to leave, but Damien caught her wrist, pulling her back. Tessa, stop, he nearly shouted, forcing her to freeze. You think I care more about this company than I care about you? You think I'd let you destroy yourself to protect my damn CEO title? She stared at him, tears spilling freely. Then what do you want, Damien? For both of us to go down together? He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, eyes blazing with pain and certainty. I want you to stay, he said hoarsely. Not for the contract. For me? She shook her head, unable to bear the weight of his words. She tore her hand free and ran out of the room, leaving Damien standing there, consumed by the storm inside him. That night, Tessa curled up in bed, clutching a pillow, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had called her mother, trying to pretend everything was fine, but her voice trembled so much that Helen could tell something was wrong. You don't have to hide anything from me, her mother said gently over the phone. Do what your heart tells you. But Tessa no longer knew what her heart wanted. All she knew was that she couldn't let Damien be destroyed because of her. She turned on the TV, hoping for a distraction. But what she saw froze her in place. Damien was on live television, sitting for an interview on a well-known news program. He looked immaculate in his gray suit, but his eyes were full of raw emotion. The host asked about the rumors surrounding his marriage. Tessa braced herself for a cold denial. Instead, Damien looked directly into the camera and said, "There have been rumors about my marriage to Tessa. I'm going to say this once, clearly. I married her because I love her. At first I didn't know it. I thought it was just a business solution. But now I'm certain. She's the only woman I want by my side." Tessa sat frozen, hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. His words rang out like a confession, not just to the world but to her. He didn't deny the contract. He didn't shift the blame. Instead, he chose to protect her, to protect them, even if it cost him everything. Do you think Tessa will forgive Damien? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know whose side you're on in this story. And if you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stories for more heart-tugging love tales. Damien's declaration on live television hit Tessa like a tidal wave, sweeping her into a whirlwind of emotions she could no longer resist. She turned off the TV, her heart pounding, a storm of pain and sweetness churning inside her. He said he loved her, or at least he said the words. But instead of relief, Tessa felt fear. Love was something she had sworn never to touch again, not after the man she once trusted shattered her heart 3 years ago. And Damien, with all his sincerity, was a danger far greater than any contract. She couldn't stay. She couldn't risk falling, only to break all over again. That night, she packed a small suitcase, taking only a few changes of clothes and a photo of her and her mother. She left a note on the kitchen table. "Thank you for everything. I can't keep doing this. Take care of yourself, Damien." She didn't look back as she left the penthouse, catching a night bus bound for her mother's hometown, a quiet place hours outside Manhattan. Tessa's hometown was peaceful, lined with tree-shaded roads and wildflower fields stretching to the horizon. She arrived at the modest house where her mother, Helen, had been staying with a cousin during her recovery. When Helen saw her, she pulled Tessa into a long embrace, saying nothing, just stroking her hair like she used to when Tessa was a child. But the pain in Tessa's chest couldn't be hidden. She told her everything. The contract, Damien, the kiss, the confession on national TV. Helen listened quietly, then gently said, "You're afraid to love, but you can't run forever. He chose you, Tessa. The question is, what will you choose?" Her mother's question haunted her. Tessa spent the next day wandering the fields where she used to play as a little girl, searching for peace. But her heart wouldn't stop whispering his name, and she hated herself for it. The next afternoon, she sat in the middle of the field, golden blossoms swaying in the breeze. And then she heard footsteps. She looked up, stunned. Damien was standing there. No suit, no car, no entourage. Just a white shirt, jeans, wind-tousled hair, and eyes burning with emotion. "How did you find me?" Tessa asked, her voice shaky as she stood. "I couldn't let you go," he said, stepping closer. "I've searched everywhere. Tessa, I know I messed up, but what I said on TV wasn't a lie. I love you." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't understand, Damien. I can't do this. I'm not strong enough to love and lose again." Damien dropped to his knees in the middle of the wildflowers and took her hands. "I used to want you to save my company," he said, voice rough. "But now, you are my life. If you walk away, I don't know who I'll be without you. Stay with me, Tessa. Not for the contract, for us." Tessa stared at him, her heart breaking open under the weight of his gaze. She wanted to run, wanted to say no, but her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "What will you choose?" And for the first time, she chose her heart. She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. And as Damien pulled her into his arms, she knew she had finally found where she belonged. The wildflower field still danced in the wind, but as Tessa's heart rose from Damien Walsh's embrace, she felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. His pleading, the sincerity in his eyes, and the patience in the way he held her hand had broken down the final wall around her heart. She agreed to return to Manhattan, but not to continue the contract. "I want us to start over," she said, her voice shaky but sure. "For real, no contract, no obligation. If you want me, you'll have to learn to love me like a normal person." Damien nodded, a rare smile lighting up his face. "I'll learn, Tessa, I promise." They returned to the penthouse, but everything felt different now. There were no more rigid boundaries, no more clipped exchanges designed to keep distance. Tessa moved her things into the guest room, refusing to sleep in the master bedroom until she felt truly ready. Damien respected that, though his eyes sometimes betrayed a longing when she accidentally stood too close. They began again with the simplest of things, like two people trying to piece together a shattered puzzle. Each morning Tessa made coffee, and Damien, awkward but determined, started learning to make breakfast. The first time he tried pancakes, the kitchen filled with the smell of scorched batter and Tessa's laughter as he flailed with the smoke alarm. "I'm a CEO, not a chef," he muttered, but the smile tugging at his lips told her he was enjoying every minute of it. Tessa taught him how to whisk eggs properly, how a dash of vanilla made the pancakes taste better. And as they sat down to eat together, she realized she no longer feared these moments of closeness. They also started taking small trips together. One weekend, Tessa convinced Damien to leave Manhattan and visit a park in the countryside. She packed a picnic basket, and he, for the first time, ditched the suit for a t-shirt and jeans. They lay in the grass, watching clouds drift by, and she told him about her childhood, running through these very fields, her mother's lullabies echoing on summer nights. Damien listened without interruption, and when he spoke of growing up in a wealthy but emotionally distant family, Tessa reached for his hand, gently soothing wounds he rarely revealed. Damien began to change, noticeably. He grew less guarded, learning to show emotion instead of hiding behind perfection. One evening when Tessa came home late from the hospital, she found him in the kitchen, trying to cook her mother's chicken soup recipe. "My mom said it's her favorite," he explained, cheeks flushed as the soup turned out too salty. Tessa laughed, but her heart warmed. He wasn't just caring for her, he was learning to love what she loved. He began spending time with her mother, Helen, who was now doing better thanks to the treatment. Damien drove her to appointments, listened patiently as she told stories, and once when Tessa arrived at the hospital, she saw him reading the newspaper aloud to Helen in his deep, soothing voice. Later, Helen squeezed Tessa's hand and whispered, "He loves you, Tessa, and I can see that you love him too." Tessa didn't deny it. She was learning to open her heart one step at a time. She and Damien began sharing more intimate moments. Nights curled up on the couch watching old movies, quiet mornings where he pulled her into his arms when she looked tired. One evening, when Tessa fell asleep on his shoulder, he gently carried her to bed, tucking her in without waking her. The next morning she woke with a full heart, knowing she loved him, not because of a contract, but because of him. Yet healing didn't come from Damien alone. Tessa also learned to forgive herself. For the old wounds left by the man who betrayed her, she realized that loving Damien wasn't a weakness, it was courage. One night, as they sat on the balcony under the glow of city lights, she turned to him and said, "I used to think love meant losing yourself, but with you I feel stronger." Damien kissed her forehead and whispered, "You've always been strong, Tessa. I'm just lucky to be the one beside you." The golden glow of sunset bathed the meadow on the outskirts of Manhattan, where wildflowers swayed in the breeze and rows of wooden chairs were adorned with soft green vines. Tessa Hart stood inside a small room in a farmhouse nearby, her heart pounding, not with fear, but anticipation. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The white wedding dress hugged her frame gently, delicate lace blooming across the fabric like tiny petals. Her dark hair was loosely braided, dotted with tiny white flowers. But what she saw in the mirror wasn't Mrs. Walsh from some old contract. It was Tessa, the woman who had reclaimed herself through love, through healed scars, and through the man waiting for her just outside. Her mother, Helen, sat nearby, eyes glistening with unshed tears but smiling brightly. Her health had improved drastically thanks to the treatment, and today she wore a soft blue dress, her silver hair neatly brushed. "You look beautiful, Tessa," she whispered, voice trembling. "I never thought I'd see this day." but I knew you'd find the right one. Tessa reached for her mother's hand, eyes misty. I got here because of you, she murmured. Thank you for always believing in me. Eleanor, Damien's mother, entered then, dressed in a deep teal silk gown that made her look regal. She embraced Tessa and whispered, You're a gift to this family, Tessa. Damien is lucky to have you. Tessa smiled, warmth flooding her chest. A year ago, she had been a stranger in their world. Now she belonged. As the sound of violins drifted in from outside, Tessa took a deep breath and grasped the hand of her cousin, who would walk her down the aisle. She stepped into the golden light of sunset, wrapped in its gentle embrace, and her eyes immediately found Damien. He stood beneath a floral arch woven from wild daisies and ivy. In a fitted navy suit, his black hair combed neatly, though a few strands were tousled by the wind, he looked both strong and tender. But what stopped her breath was his gaze. Intense, sincere, like the world had faded until only she remained. He wasn't waiting for her to save a company, to impress shareholders. He was waiting to promise her a lifetime. There was no Manhattan opulence, no chandeliers, no marble floors. Just the people who mattered, family, friends, those who had witnessed their journey. Helen and Eleanor sat in the front row, hand in hand, their eyes glowing with pride. Tessa's former co-workers from the daily grind beamed, whispering about the girl who once made their coffee, now standing as a bride. Even Ethan, the witty software engineer who once made Damien jealous, was there, raising his glass from afar with a smile. Tessa walked slowly, each step a declaration. This is my choice, not for a contract, but for love. When her cousin placed her hand in Damien's, he gripped it gently, warmly. You look incredible, he whispered, voice hoarse with emotion. I still can't believe I deserve you. Tessa tilted her head, teasing. You worked pretty hard to get me, Walsh. Don't get shy now. He chuckled, and the sound made the guests laugh with them. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice rich and steady in the quiet air. Tessa and Damien exchanged vows. Not scripted lines, but words pulled straight from the heart. Tessa promised to remind him that life was more than work. It was burnt breakfasts, stargazing nights, and the moments that made them laugh until their sides hurt. Damien vowed to protect her, not just with strength, but with the heart he had learned to open because of her. You taught me how to live, Tessa, he said, eyes glimmering, and I'll spend the rest of my life thanking you. When they exchanged rings, Tessa felt the tears flow freely down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. She wanted to feel everything, to remember it all. The simple gold band slid onto her finger, and when Damien kissed her hand, she knew this was the first time she had cried from pure happiness. The reception was held under lanterns strung between trees, their warm golden glow flickering like fireflies. The tables were simple, homemade bread, fresh salad, and trays of cookies Tessa had baked with her mom. Soft acoustic music played as Damien pulled Tessa to the dance floor and wrapped her in his arms. They swayed slowly, the world around them fading until only the rhythm of their hearts remained. Do you know how much I love you? He whispered, his lips brushing her ear. Tessa rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. I do, and I love you, Damien, more than I ever thought I could. When it came time to cut the cake, Tessa mischievously dabbed a bit of frosting onto Damien's nose. He blinked in surprise, then burst into laughter. The guests clapped and cheered as he retaliated with a frosting kiss on her cheek. Laughter filled the meadow, and Tessa's heart felt light as air. Helen stood to toast them, her voice frail but full of emotion. Tessa has always been my light, and Damien, you brought that light to the whole world. May your happiness last forever. As the evening deepened and guests slowly departed, Tessa and Damien lingered beneath a large tree, fingers entwined, gazing at the silver moon above. She leaned into him, his warmth grounding her. Today was the best day of my life, she said softly. Damien turned to her, lifting her chin to meet his eyes. Every day with you is the best day for me. But today, he paused, searching for words. Then, just like he had in the wildflower field months ago, he knelt before her, gripping her hand tightly. The first time I proposed, it was to save a company. This time, it's to keep you forever. Tessa pulled him up and wrapped her arms around him, her tears blending with her smile. Forever's a big promise, Damien, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. But I'm keeping you close, to make sure you keep it. They kissed beneath the moonlight, the wind whispering its blessing. No contracts, no pretending, no walls left between them. Only love, deep, real, and steady. As endless as the wildflower field stretching out before them, Tessa knew whatever came next, she and Damien would face it. Together, every day, for always. If you've ever experienced a love that changed your life, drop A in the comments. And if you believe true love always finds its way back, share this video with someone you care about. Chapter 1, A Kiss from a Game. Manhattan, New York shimmered under 1,000 lights. A towering glass building in Midtown had been transformed into a stage for tonight's charity gala, where the elite gathered to showcase their generosity, or at least pretend to. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected off marble floors, the clink of wine glasses mingling with polite laughter. Cassie Monroe, 28, stood behind the temporary bar, hands swiftly mixing a martini. Her tight black uniform made her look sharp, but the tiny silver guitar pendant peeking from beneath her collar hinted at her true self. Cassie didn't belong here. She was a self-taught musician, scraping by on-side gigs to afford recording equipment. By day, she played acoustic guitar in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, writing rustic folk songs and uploading videos to YouTube. A few thousand followers tuned in, but the dream of performing on a big stage still felt far away. Tonight, all she wanted was to finish her shift, collect her tips, and go home to her guitar. "Cassie, hurry up! That real estate mogul's waiting for his third drink," whispered Lena, a fellow bartender, nodding toward an impatient middle-aged man. Cassie smiled and slid the martini across the counter. She was used to the fast pace of events like this, polite smiles avoiding the curious gazes of the guests. But tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the sip of wine she'd had during break, or maybe it was the glint in Lena's eyes, like she was about to stir up trouble. As the crowd thinned, Lena pulled Cassie and two other co-workers, Miguel and Tara, into a shadowed corner behind the bar. "We need a little fun," Lena declared, raising a bottle of Prosecco she'd borrowed from storage. "Let's play truth or dare. Whoever refuses drinks the whole glass." Cassie rolled her eyes but couldn't resist Lena's mischievous grin. She took another sip of Prosecco, warmth spreading through her. "All right, but keep it tame," she said. The first round flew by. Miguel picked truth and admitted to faking sick to skip work. Tara picked dare and danced a ridiculous jig on the floor. When it was Cassie's turn, Lena arched an eyebrow. "Truth or dare, girl?" Cassie hesitated. She didn't like talking about herself. The past, the unfinished songs, or the dreams she kept buried. "Dare," she said, voice trembling slightly from the alcohol. Lena grinned wickedly. "Kiss a stranger in the room. Anyone you want, but it has to be the most unapproachable one." Miguel whistled. Tara covered her mouth, giggling. Cassie blushed, her heart thudding. "You guys are insane," she muttered, but Lena's stare told her there was no backing out. She stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and scanned the room. Tuxedos and ball gowns floated past, but one figure drew her attention. He stood alone near the window, back straight, eyes distant, dark brown hair, a perfectly tailored black suit, and a face so cold it seemed nothing in this world could touch him. "Him," Cassie whispered, pointing. Lena squinted. "Oh, Cassie, that's Julian Hayes, tech CEO, ultra rich, ultra private. Kiss him? Good luck." Cassie swallowed hard, but the Prosecco and peer pressure pushed her forward. The crowd blurred, her heartbeat roared in her ears. Julian Hayes stood silently, holding a glass of whiskey, eyes fixed on the city beyond. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered, but there was something lonely in the way he stood. Cassie stopped a step away. "Excuse me," she said, voice shaky. Julian turned. His deep blue eyes met hers, unreadable. She didn't think, she just moved. Rising on her toes, she placed a hand on his shoulder and kissed him. His lips were cool, laced with whiskey, yet unexpectedly soft. The kiss lasted only 3 seconds, but it scrambled her breath. She pulled away, face flushed, her shirt shifted just enough for the guitar pendant to show. Julian looked stunned, his gaze flickering as though he'd just been pulled from a dream. "What just happened?" he asked, voice low and calm, but his eyes locked on her. Cassie mumbled, "Just a game. I'm sorry." She turned before he could say anything else and bolted back to the bar, her heart ready to explode. Lena and the others clapped and snickered, but Cassie wished she could vanish. "You're insane, Cassie," Miguel laughed. She shook her head, trying to focus on wiping glasses, but the feel of his lips still haunted her. In the corner of the room, Julian still stood, his finger lightly touching his mouth. He wasn't used to being surprised. As the CEO of Hayes Innovations, he'd built walls around himself long ago, after his fiancée's betrayal. But that girl, with the guitar necklace and nervous eyes, had shaken something loose. He watched her through the crowd, saw her quietly mixing drinks, softly humming a tune. That melody, raw and honest, threaded its way into his mind. Cassie's shift ended at midnight. She pocketed her tips, just enough to buy a new set of guitar strings, and stepped into the cold street. New York air turned her breath into pale mist. Pulling her coat tighter, she thought about the kiss. "Idiot," she scolded herself. Julian Hayes was someone she'd never see again. He belonged to a world of chandeliers and tuxedos. She had her guitar, and dreams still out of reach. She took the subway back to Brooklyn. Her tiny apartment greeted her with the smell of old wood and warm yellow lights. Her acoustic guitar lay on the bed, the only friend who truly understood her. Cassie sat down, strummed a few chords, and softly sang a line from a song she was writing. "Lost in the city, chasing a spark." The melody rose, soothing her heart. She didn't know that, in a high-rise penthouse across the city, Julian Hayes was searching for a name on YouTube, Cassie Monroe. A video appeared, her singing in a cafe, voice clear, eyes burning with passion. He clicked play, and for the first time in years felt his heart stir. You're watching Soul Stories, where every tale whispers of love, healing, and hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and that love often arrives when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our journey. Chapter 2. A Chance Encounter. Julian Hayes wasn't used to being haunted. As the CEO of Hayes Innovations, he ran his life the way he ran his company. Everything planned, no room for surprises. But since that night at the charity gala, the image of the girl with the guitar necklace and that unexpected kiss lingered in his mind. Cassie Monroe. He'd found her on YouTube with just a few clicks. Her channel had thousands of followers, enough for a presence but not fame. Her videos, singing in coffee shops, strumming an acoustic guitar in a tiny apartment, carried a raw honesty he couldn't look away from. Her voice, warm and unpolished, pulled him out of the cold, controlled days he was used to. Today, Julian sat in his office on the 50th floor, gazing out over Manhattan. On his computer screen was one of Cassie's videos, a song called City Sparks. The lyrics were simple but hit him deep. Chasing lights but losing heart. He turned off the video, telling himself he didn't have time for such nonsense. But her lips, the look in her eyes as she walked away, kept flashing back. He had to see her again. Not to pursue her. Julian didn't believe in love anymore after his fiancée's betrayal, but to understand why she had shaken him so deeply. The Rusty Anchor, a bar in the Lower East Side, buzzed on Friday night. Cassie stood behind the bar mixing a mojito, neon lights casting a glow on her high-tied brown hair. She wore a black t-shirt, her silver guitar pendant peeking out at the collar. The shift was busy, but she liked the rhythm. It helped her forget the stupid kiss from last week. Julian Hayes. She still blushed thinking about it, wondering what had possessed her. Thankfully, he belonged to a completely different world, and she would never see him again. On her break, Cassie sat in a corner of the bar with the small guitar she always brought along. She liked to sing a song to relax, and tonight she picked one of her own, Under the Noise. Her voice rose, gentle yet full of emotion, telling a story of dreams buried beneath the hum of city life. The crowd gradually quieted. A few turned to listen. Cassie didn't notice. She was singing for herself as always. Julian walked in at that very moment. He wore a navy shirt, no suit, trying to blend into the casual atmosphere of the Rusty Anchor. But his sharp eyes drew a few curious looks. He took a seat in a shadowed corner, ordered a whiskey, and listened. Cassie's voice drifted through the noise, touching him like a breeze. As she sang the final line, "Find me where the silence grows," his heart stirred with a feeling he hadn't known in years. When she finished, a few guests clapped. She smiled, tucked her guitar away, and returned to the bar. Then she saw him. Julian Hayes sitting there, his eyes locked on her. Her heart slammed. What is he doing here, she wondered, forcing herself to stay calm. Another whiskey, she asked, her tone a bit sharp. Julian gave a faint smile, the corner of his mouth lifting. No, thank you. That was a beautiful song. Did you write it yourself? Cassie froze. She hadn't expected him to notice, let alone recognize her. Yeah, just messing around, she said, wiping the counter to hide her nerves. Julian tilted his head. Didn't sound like messing around. That melody, it made me forget everything for a moment. His words were sincere, but Cassie was wary. Rich men often spoke sweetly. She knew better. Thanks, she said curtly, turning away to serve another guest. A few days later, Cassie sat in her favorite coffee shop in Williamsburg, a notebook open in front of her. She was jotting down lyrics, caught in a moment, scared to stay. She didn't know who the song was about, but Julian's image kept flickering in her thoughts. She shook her head, telling herself it was just leftover noise from that silly kiss. Julian appeared, as if summoned from her mind. He wore a knit coat, looking more approachable than last time, but still unmistakably him. Another coincidence, he said, sliding into the seat across from her with a polite nod. Cassie raised an eyebrow. Is it really? Julian smiled, not denying it. I saw you writing something. Lyrics? He asked, nodding toward the notebook, curiosity in his eyes. Cassie snapped the notebook shut, slightly annoyed. Are you following me, Mr. CEO? Julian raised his hands in mock surrender. Not following. I just like your music. It's real. Cassie studied him, searching for the usual fake charm, but saw only rare sincerity. They started talking, awkwardly at first, then more naturally. Julian told her he used to play piano in college, but gave it up for work. Cassie admitted she wrote songs to forget bad days. Music's like a friend that never leaves, she said, and immediately blushed, realizing how vulnerable that sounded. The next day, a package arrived at the Rusty Anchor, addressed to Cassie. Inside was a high-quality condenser microphone, the kind she could only dream of affording. No name, just a note. For your voice to shine. Cassie frowned, instantly suspecting Julian. Did he think she needed charity? But she couldn't deny it. The mic would seriously improve her recording quality. That night, Julian showed up at the bar, almost like he knew she'd confront him. You sent the mic, didn't you? Cassie said, voice a mix of gratitude and challenge. Julian nodded. I didn't mean to offend. I just think you deserve the best. Cassie sighed, but something in his eyes, gentle, almost lonely, softened her. Thank you, she said, but don't think I owe you anything. They talked longer, about music, New York, small things. Cassie realized Julian wasn't like the wealthy men she'd met before. He didn't boast, he didn't control. He listened, really listened, as if her voice was the only thing that mattered. As the bar neared closing, Julian set down his glass. I'm starting a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, he said. I want you to be an advisor, to help design the program, and maybe teach music to the kids. Cassie blinked, surprised. Why me? Julian looked straight at her. Because you know how to inspire. I see that in your music. Cassie didn't answer right away. She needed time. Julian stood, leaving behind a business card. Think about it, Cassie. He walked away, but his gaze lingered, like a melody she couldn't forget. She held the card, her fingers brushing the guitar pendant. For the first time, she wondered if fate was daring her to play a new game. Manhattan in the afternoon buzzed like a never-ending symphony. Car horns, footsteps, and voices all blending on the streets below. Inside the sleek offices of Hayes Innovations, Cassie Monroe sat at a conference table, a stack of documents about the scholarship fund in front of her. She still wasn't used to this world, the glass walls, oversized screens, and the professional chill that hung in the air. But this part-time advisory job was an opportunity to stabilize her finances, and more importantly, to teach music to underprivileged students. Cassie, 28, her signature silver guitar pendant peeking from under her blouse, felt like she had stepped into a world that didn't quite belong to her. And the one who had brought her into it, Julian Hayes, was sitting across from her, those deep blue eyes more intense than she would have liked. Julian, 34, was no longer the cold CEO she'd kissed at the charity gala. He was still polished in a gray shirt, but something gentler surfaced when he spoke about the scholarship fund. "We need a music program that actually inspires," he said, sliding a document across the table. "What do you think about teaching guitar and songwriting to the kids?" Cassie nodded, flipping through the papers, though her mind wandered. She still didn't understand why Julian had chosen her, a bartender, an unknown musician on YouTube, for this. The meeting ended, but Julian asked her to stay a little longer to discuss further. The office slowly emptied, golden light from the sunset spilling through the windows. Cassie placed the small guitar she always carried onto the table, like a silent shield. "I've reviewed the plan," she said in a steady tone. "The kids need something practical, like learning how to turn their feelings into lyrics." Julian smiled slightly. "Like you do?" Cassie blushed. She hadn't expected him to be so familiar with her music. "I just write so I don't go crazy in this city," she said, half joking. Julian stood and walked to the window, gazing down at the streets. "You know, I used to play piano," he said, his voice low. "But I gave it up. Life didn't leave room for it." Cassie tilted her head, curious. "So why do you care about music now?" Julian turned back to her, a shadow in his eyes. "Because it reminds me that I used to feel things." The mood shifted, more intimate. Cassie began strumming a few chords on her guitar, a nervous habit. Julian sat down closer to her, not too close, but near enough for her to feel his presence. "How did you write your first song?" he asked. Cassie paused, her fingers brushing the guitar pendant. She wasn't used to opening up, but his eyes, sincere and non-judgmental, made it easier. "I was 20, she began quietly. "I dated this guy. Thought it was love. He said he'd help me record professionally, but he just wanted money. Took everything I saved for equipment, then left." She gave a bitter laugh. "I wrote my first song the night he disappeared. It was awful, but it kept me from falling apart." Julian listened without interrupting. He saw himself in her story. Betrayals, scars no one else could see. "And you?" Cassie asked, genuinely curious. "A guy like you probably has people around all the time. Why are you alone?" Julian looked at her, surprised by the bluntness. He sighed, and for the first time his mask slipped. 5 years ago, I was engaged. Her name was Elise. I thought she loved me, but she only wanted a tech project I was building. She sold it to my competitor and walked away. It was worth millions, but losing it didn't hurt as much as losing trust." Cassie was silent, hearing the pain in his voice. She strummed a gentle chord, trying to soften the air between them. "I don't really know what to say," she admitted, "but I think you deserve better." Julian smiled, his first real smile. "So do you, Cassie." They kept talking about the streets of New York, how Cassie found melodies in car horns and falling rain. Julian shared how he used to love jazz, but now only listened to music to escape pressure. Cassie teased, "Jazz? I thought you were more of a dry symphony kind of guy." Julian laughed, his eyes sparkling. "You make me want to listen to your music more." To break the tension, Cassie picked up her guitar. "Okay, but don't laugh," she warned, then strummed a slow melody. She sang Streetlight Lullaby, a song she'd written about wandering Brooklyn at night, searching for light in the dark. Her voice was clear and honest, the lyrics telling their own story. "Under streetlights were just strangers, holding secrets, chasing dangers." Julian sat motionless, feeling something inside him stir with every note. By the time she sang the final line, he felt a part of himself fill that had long been empty. Cassie stopped, cheeks flushed. "It's not finished," she said, tucking her hair behind her ear. Julian looked at her, his voice husky. "It's perfect." He pulled out his phone, opened a recording app. Sing it again. I want to keep it. Cassie laughed, shaking her head. Are you nuts? I don't sing on command. But she still played a few chords again, letting him record a short clip. The sound of her guitar filled the office, like a secret only the two of them shared. As the sun finally set, Cassie packed up. Julian walked her to the elevator, the air between them lighter than ever. Do you think music can heal? He asked suddenly. Cassie looked at him, her eyes soft. It saved me. Maybe it can save you too. Julian nodded, saying nothing more, but his eyes said everything. Cassie stepped outside, New York's night air wrapping around her. She thought about Julian, not the wealthy CEO, but the man with scars like hers. Back in his office, Julian replayed the recording. Cassie's voice rang out, raw and real. Under streetlights, we're just strangers. He saved the file to his phone, a rare smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, he felt like he could trust someone. And her voice, he knew he wanted to hear it forever. Chapter 3, A Misunderstanding That Shattered Trust. The Plaza Hotel glittered like a palace, crystal chandeliers casting light over ball gowns and tuxedos at tonight's charity gala. Cassie Monroe stood near the bar, wearing a borrowed black dress from Lena, feeling like a stray note in a symphony of luxury. Julian Hayes had invited her as a consultant for the scholarship fund, but the way he'd looked at her over the past few weeks, gentle, attentive, told a deeper story. She had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, he saw her as more than an unknown musician. But tonight her heart was uneasy, like she sensed a storm was coming. Julian's scholarship fund was the centerpiece of the event. On the giant screen, a video played showcasing the students the fund had helped, backed by Streetlight Lullaby, the song Cassie had written. Her voice echoed through the ballroom, raw and emotional, silencing the crowd. Julian stood on stage speaking about the fund's mission, but his eyes scanned the audience for her. Cassie smiled, fingers clutching the strap of her bag where her lyric notebook rested. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but for Julian, she had said yes. After his speech, Cassie was invited on stage to answer questions about the music program. She stepped into the bright lights, heart pounding. A reporter with a sharp smile raised her mic. Ms. Monroe, your song in the video is deeply moving, but I've heard it bears a strong resemblance to a track by Lila Gray. Did you borrow inspiration from her? Cassie froze as if punched in the gut. Streetlight Lullaby was her soul, born from nights wandering Brooklyn. No, she answered, voice trembling. I wrote that song myself. I don't know Layla Gray. The crowd murmured. The reporter pressed on, sweet voice laced with venom. Really? Then what about the rumor that you once dated Martin Kessler, Mr. Hayes' biggest competitor? Did he get you this opportunity? The room went still. Cassie felt the blood drain from her face. Martin Kessler. 4 years ago, when she was just a 24-year-old hopeful musician, Martin had approached her, claiming to be a music producer. He promised to get her into a studio, but only used her to network with artists and sponsors, then disappeared once she was no longer useful. She hadn't known he was a tech businessman or that he had any connection to Julian. She looked at Julian, standing near the stage. His face had darkened. The old pain, Elise's betrayal, selling his million-dollar project to Kessler, clearly written in his expression. I didn't know who Martin was back then, Cassie said, her voice cracking. He was just some guy in the music scene. I have no ties to him. But her words were fragile, drowning beneath the crowd's skeptical whispers. The reporter smiled, moving on to another question, leaving Cassie shattered on stage. She stepped down, legs shaky, and found Julian in a corner of the ballroom. He stood alone, fingers clenched around a whiskey glass. Julian, she said, pleading, I didn't know Martin was your rival. He lied to me, used me. And the song, it's mine. Julian looked at her, his eyes colder than she had ever seen. You were his, he said, voice low. And now you're here, in my project. And I'm supposed to believe that's coincidence? Cassie blinked, tears spilling. You think I'm like him? After everything I've shared with you? Julian stepped back, his expression caught between pain and doubt. Elise said she was innocent too, he muttered. She took everything I built and gave it to Kessler. I don't know who to trust anymore, Cassie. His words cut like blades. Cassie backed away, her voice breaking. If you want someone without a past, without mistakes, then I'm not her. She turned and ran, fleeing the ballroom, leaving behind the lights and laughter. Outside the plaza, the New York night was bitterly cold. Cassie hugged herself, trying to hold back the sobs. She had opened her heart to Julian, sung for him, and he met her with suspicion. Her song, the thing she cherished most, was now being called a stolen work. She called a cab and returned to her small apartment in Brooklyn. In the dark, she sat by the window, watching the city lights. But she didn't touch her guitar. Tonight, music couldn't soothe her. Back inside the ballroom, Julian stood alone, whiskey glass empty. Cassie's voice still played on the screen. Under streetlights, we're just strangers. He remembered her singing that in his office, how sincere her eyes had been. But Martin Kessler's name loomed like a ghost, dragging the pain of Elise back to life. He wanted to believe Cassie, but the fear of betrayal was louder. He pulled out his phone and replayed Streetlight Lullaby. Her voice made his heart ache. He had been wrong to say what he did, but he didn't know how to fix it. Julian left the gala without a word. In the back of his car, he listened to her song, Eyes Distant. He wanted to find her, to apologize, but fear held him back. In Brooklyn, Cassie held her notebook and wrote one line. Trust is a song I forgot how to sing. Tears fell as she closed it. Two hearts in the same city, now separated by a melody no one was singing. Early autumn in Pennsylvania was gentler than New York. Tree-lined roads blanketed with golden leaves and the air crisp and clean. Cassie Monroe stood before a small classroom in a community center in a struggling town, her acoustic guitar in hand, guiding a group of kids through basic chords. She had left New York 3 weeks ago, taking a volunteer teaching position through a nonprofit she had contacted long ago. She needed space, not just from the city, but from Julian Hayes and the crushing doubts he had voiced at the charity gala. But even here, among children's laughter, her heart remained heavy, like a song still missing its chorus. Cassie rented a small room in a local boarding house, just big enough for her guitar and lyric notebook. She tried to find her spark again, but every chord reminded her of Julian's eyes, tender in the office, cold at the gala. He'd called her a user, questioned even Streetlight Lullaby, a song born from her own broken pieces. She told herself she was strong, but the pain crept in like autumn wind through old windows. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Julian threw himself into work like a machine. Meetings, contracts, strategies for Hayes Innovations filled his days. But at night, he couldn't escape Cassie. He'd rewatch her cafe performance on YouTube, her voice whispering, "Under streetlights, we're just strangers." Each note felt like a quiet accusation. He had let fear cloud his trust. Martin Kessler, who'd once manipulated both Elise and Cassie, wasn't worth losing her. Julian opened his laptop and typed an email. Cassie, I'm sorry. I never should have doubted you. Your song, your voice, they're real. I want to make things right. He typed, deleted, typed again, but he didn't send it. Pride and fear of rejection held him back. Instead, he watched a new video Cassie had uploaded days ago, a song called Broken Chords. Its lyrics dripped with pain. You took my song, left me in silence. Trust was a note I couldn't find. Julian listened, heart clenched. She had written it because of him, because of what he said. He closed the laptop, knowing he had to do something, but he didn't know where to start. In Pennsylvania, Cassie was teaching the kids how to write lyrics, encouraging them to tell their own stories through music. She smiled as one shy boy strummed his first chord, but her eyes drifted. She carried her guitar through town, playing in the park, at small cafes, trying to find herself again. One night, she sat by the Susquehanna River, writing broken chords in her notebook. The lyrics poured out like tears. I sang for you, but you didn't hear. She uploaded the video, not expecting anyone to watch, only needing release. The next day, an email arrived from Julian's Scholarship Foundation. Subject, Invitation to the Tech and Arts Conference. Cassie opened it, her heart thudding. It was an invitation to perform at a major conference in New York, where Julian would be the keynote speaker. At the bottom was a handwritten message. I want you to sing at the event. Your voice deserves to be heard. Cassie frowned and tossed her phone onto the bed. Was this pity? Guilt? She didn't respond. She decided to stay in Pennsylvania. She didn't need Julian's stage or his gaze. But every night after the kids went home, Cassie sat alone and played her guitar. She tried writing something new, but the melodies always circled back to Julian. His rare smile, the way he had once listened to her like her voice was the only sound in the world. She shook her head, telling herself she didn't need him. But when a student asked, Miss Cassie, have you ever sung for someone you loved? She went silent, eyes stinging. She had sung for Julian, and he had walked away. Back in New York, Julian couldn't stop thinking about her. He visited the Rusty Anchor, hoping to see her, but found only Lena, who raised an eyebrow when she saw him. She's gone, Mr. CEO, Lena said, her voice biting. She's worth more than you thought. Julian nodded, leaving the bar hollow. He stopped by the cafe in Williamsburg, where he had once watched Cassie write lyrics. Her notebook was gone, but he pictured her sitting there, fingers drifting across the page. One night, he called her. The phone rang, but he hung up before she could answer. He didn't know what to say. He watched broken chords again, her lyrics slicing into him. You broke the chords I played for you. He realized how deeply he had hurt her, and that he was the reason. He drafted another email. Cassie, I was wrong. Please let me fix this. But once again, he didn't send it. He feared she wouldn't forgive him, feared she no longer needed him. In Pennsylvania, Cassie received a message from Lena. The CEO showed up. He looked wrecked. He asked about you. Cassie read it, heart tightening, but she didn't reply. She focused on the kids, teaching them a cheerful song about fall. But when one little girl hit the wrong note, giggled and said, I'm sorry, Miss Cassie. Cassie thought of Julian. He had never apologized aloud. But that look in his eyes at the gala, pain, confusion, said he never meant to hurt her. She opened his email again, rereading the handwritten note, Your voice deserves to be heard. She wanted to delete it, but her finger paused. Instead, she closed the laptop, picked up her guitar, and played a new melody, one without words. It was sad, but somewhere in it was hope, like moonlight over the Susquehanna. She didn't know if she could forgive him, but she knew she hadn't forgotten. In his penthouse, Julian stared out over Manhattan. He played Streetlight Lullaby on his phone. Cassie's voice filled the silence. Tender, true. He made a decision. If he ever saw her again, he would apologize, no matter what it took. But where was that chance now when she was hundreds of miles away and their hearts were divided? By melodies no one dared to sing together. He turned off the lights, letting her voice echo in the darkness, hoping one day they'd find their way back. Still with us? If you're hearing this outside Soul Stories, come back to where the story truly began, with heart and honesty. Chapter 4. When Fate Comes Knocking. A bitter October night cloaked New York in shadows, the lights of skyscrapers flickering like candles in the dark. Inside the Javits Convention Center, hundreds gathered for a major tech conference where Julian Hayes, CEO of Hayes Innovations, stood on stage. A spotlight illuminated his navy suit as he spoke with calm authority about the future of technology and the mission of his scholarship fund. But his mind wasn't on the crowd. It was on Cassie Monroe, the woman whose voice had once awakened his heart. He had sent her an email, inviting her to perform tonight, hoping she'd come, but her silence lingered. He wondered if fate would bring them back together, or if he'd destroyed everything with his mistrust. His keynote ended with polite applause. Julian bowed, his gaze distant, and exited toward the parking lot, where his driver, Mike, waited by the black Bentley. Long night, sir, Mike said, opening the door. Julian slid into the back seat, pulled out his phone, and saw a YouTube notification. Cassie had uploaded a new video. Broken chords. He tapped play. Her voice poured out, raw and aching. You took my song, left me in silence. He closed his eyes, guilt rising like a tide. He had let his fear of betrayal eclipse his trust. He whispered, barely audible, If there's a God, Please give me a chance to make this right. The car moved down the avenue, city lights blurring past. Suddenly, a sharp screech. "Hold on, Mr. Hayes," Mike shouted. Julian looked up. Headlights blazed straight into them. The car swerved, then slammed into a median. The crunch of metal tore through the night. Julian was thrown against the door, glass shattering, blood trailing from his temple. Darkness swallowed him, and just before consciousness slipped away, he thought he heard her voice, soft, haunting. Under streetlights were just strangers. In a small Pennsylvania town, Cassie sat in her dimly lit rented room, her guitar resting quietly on the bed. She had just finished another music class for underprivileged kids, trying to find joy in their laughter. But her heart remained tangled in pain, haunted by the gala and Julian's words. "Your voice deserves to be heard." She tried to forget him, but every note she played led back to him. His gaze when she sang, the hurt in his accusations. She turned on the TV to shake the thoughts away, but a breaking news alert interrupted. Tech billionaire Julian Hayes in critical condition following car crash after major conference in New York. Foul play suspected. Images of the crushed Bentley flashed across the screen, police tape flapping in the wind. The anchor reported Julian was in the ICU, his condition grave. Cassie froze, the glass of water in her hand shattering on the floor. His smile, his wounded eyes, all of it crashed into her like a wave. She couldn't breathe. It was as if her own heart had stopped too. She dropped to her knees, clutching the small wooden cross hanging on the wall. Her grandmother's gift, long untouched. "Please, God," she whispered through tears, "don't let it end like this." Her faith had never been strong, but tonight it was the only light left. She thought of Streetlight Lullaby, the song she'd written for Julian, the one he'd once recorded. She had believed it was just a moment. Now she believed maybe, just maybe, she had been led to him, even if only to sing once. Cassie threw her guitar into the back seat of her aging Toyota Corolla. The Pennsylvania night was dark, but she drove, eyes blurred with tears. Highway lights streaked across her windshield. She whispered into the silence, "Please let me get there in time." She remembered what her grandmother used to say, "Faith is walking even when you can't see the path." She didn't know if she still loved Julian or if she was just terrified of losing him, but she had to be there. The radio flicked on automatically. She turned it off. She only wanted to hear the song inside her, holding secrets, chasing dangers. In New York, police combed through the wreckage. The Bentley's brake lines had been deliberately cut, an act of sabotage. A typed threat had arrived at Hayes Innovations that morning. "Drop the project, or next time, no one survives." Investigators suspected Martin Kessler, the same man who had once manipulated both Elise and Cassie. Media outlets swarmed with headlines: "Tech mogul assassination attempt," "Rival sabotage or scandal." But in the ICU at Mount Sinai Hospital, Julian lay unconscious, machines beeping in rhythm with his fragile heartbeat. Unaware of the storm outside, Cassie drove through the night 6 hours without stopping. At a gas station, she gripped the cross in her pocket, whispering, "Please keep him safe." As dawn broke, she reached New York. She parked outside the hospital, hair tangled, guitar slung across her back. Inside, a nurse guided her to the ICU. Only family was allowed in, but she was permitted to look through the glass. Julian lay still, head bandaged, face pale, an oxygen tube beneath his nose. Cassie froze, tears streaming silently. It felt like the world had collapsed. She sank onto a bench outside the room, her guitar beside her. A nurse passed by, gave her a kind look, but said nothing when Cassie began to hum softly. Streetlight Lullaby. Just above a whisper, "Under streetlights, we're just strangers." Her voice cracked, but she kept singing, like a prayer, a plea, a lifeline. She believed, even if just a little, that God might be listening, that fate hadn't finished their story yet. As her song ended, she bowed her head, whispering, "Julian, please don't go." She didn't know if he could hear her, didn't know if he would wake, but she was there, with trembling faith and a voice full of love, hoping it was enough to bring him back. Inside the ICU, Julian's heartbeat, though weak, persisted, and somewhere, in the deep shadows of unconsciousness, a distant melody stirred. Familiar, soft, like her voice, like light calling him home. Mount Sinai Hospital shimmered under the cold, sterile, white lights, the steady beeping of machines marking a rhythm that refused to cease. Inside the ICU room, Julian Hayes lay motionless, his head and chest wrapped in white bandages, an oxygen tube beneath his nose. The sharp, commanding features of the powerful CEO had softened into something pale and vulnerable. Cassie Monroe sat beside him, trembling hands resting on the acoustic guitar across her lap. She had been there since morning, after driving all night from Pennsylvania, fueled only by fragile hope and a desperate prayer that God would keep him alive. Her eyes stayed fixed on Julian as if the moment she looked away, he might vanish. Cassie hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten, save for a weak cup of coffee from the vending machine. The nurse had allowed her into the ICU for a few hours, with one rule: no noise. But she hadn't said anything about singing softly. Her hair was tangled, her eyes red from crying. She thought of those brief but unforgettable weeks, working with Julian, the way he had listened to Streetlight Lullaby in his office, how his eyes had softened like he was about to say something that never came. Then the gala, his doubt, his cruel words. She'd left New York believing she was strong enough to forget him. But now, seeing him like this, broken and still, she knew she wasn't strong enough to lose him. She reached out, placing her hand gently on his. His skin was cold. "Julian," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought I was strong when I left New York, when I ignored your email. But I'm not. I'm weak. I can't lose you." Tears slipped down her cheeks, soaking into her worn coat. She bowed her head, murmuring a prayer. "Dear God, please give him another chance. If this is destiny, don't let it end like this." Her faith had always been a flicker, but now it was the only light guiding her through the dark. She picked up her guitar, her fingers brushing softly over the strings, and then she began to sing. Her voice was fragile, barely more than a breath. "Under streetlights, we're just strangers, holding secrets, chasing dangers." The melody drifted through the room like incense, sacred, trembling. She sang not for performance, not for praise, but as prayer. Each note was a lifeline, tying her to him. When she reached the final lines, her voice broke completely. "I love you, Julian. Whether you hear me or not, I love you." She lowered her head, tears soaking her sleeves. And then something. A faint squeeze. His fingers wrapped loosely around hers. Cassie froze, breath catching in her throat. She looked up. His eyes were still closed, but a single tear trailed from the corner of his eye. "Julian?" she whispered, voice shaking. He didn't respond, still hovering somewhere between unconsciousness and wakefulness. But the pressure of his fingers, subtle, deliberate, was enough. She clutched his hand, sobbing openly now, the moment a fragile miracle in her arms. God had heard her. Somehow, against all odds, he had heard. She refused to leave, even when the nurse gently reminded her visiting hours had ended. Cassie pulled out her notebook and began to write. Lyrics scribbled hastily, born from emotion and need. "In the quiet, I found you. Through the darkness, faith pulled through." There was no title yet, only a heartbeat and a promise. She kept glancing at Julian, half expecting him to open his eyes at any moment. She whispered, "You have to wake up, Julian. I still owe you a song." Outside the ICU, the world churned. News crews camped in the hospital lobby, headlines flashing across screens. Billionaire tech mogul survives assassination attempt. Brake lines cut, all eyes on rival Martin Kessler. Police confirmed the crash had been deliberate, and all signs pointed to Julian's longtime nemesis, Kessler, the same man who had once deceived both Elise and Cassie. But inside that hospital room, none of that mattered. Cassie didn't care about enemies, business, or the media. She only cared about the man in the bed. She reached into her pocket, fingers finding the small wooden cross her grandmother had left her. She clutched it tightly. "God brought me here," she thought. "Now please, keep him with me." She stayed at the hospital all day, only stepping away for a brief moment to call Lena. "I'm not going back to Pennsylvania right now," she said quietly. On the other end, Lena sighed. "You love him, don't you?" Cassie didn't respond. She just said, "Thank you." She returned to Julian's bedside and began to write again. She wrote about faith, about love, about things she once believed she wasn't worthy of. Each line on the page was a step closer to him, closer to healing what was broken. Near midnight, the doctor entered, glancing at Julian's chart. Cassie rose to her feet, heart racing. "Ms. Monroe," the doctor said in a calm voice, "he's past the critical phase. His vitals are stabilizing. He'll need rest, time, but he's going to recover. It may take weeks or longer." Cassie nodded, tears sliding down her face again, this time out of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, eyes on Julian. He was still unconscious, but the slight squeeze of his hand, the single tear down his cheek, it had been enough. She knew he had heard her. Somewhere in that dreamlike void, he had reached for her. She sat back down, placing her notebook beside the bed. She didn't sing anymore. She just held his hand, feeling warmth slowly return to it. She leaned close, whispering, "I'll be here, Julian, no matter how long it takes." She looked toward the window where the lights of New York glittered like scattered notes of a song. And deep in her heart, stronger now than ever, was the belief that destiny had led them to each other, and that God would lead them through this night. Inside the ICU, Julian's heartbeat continued, steady and true. A quiet melody beginning again, promising one day they would sing it together. Chapter 5. A Fragile Reunion. Autumn sunlight filtered softly through the blinds of Mount Sinai Hospital, warming the recovery room where Julian Hayes lay. 4 days had passed since the accident. Though he was no longer in the ICU, his body remained weak, a fresh scar peeking from beneath the bandage on his forehead. Cassie Monroe sat by his bedside, hands clasped tightly, her expression tender but anxious. She had been there from the moment he was admitted, leaving only briefly to shower and call Lena. Her faith, both in God and in the fate that had led her back to Julian, was the flame that kept her steady, even as her heart fluttered every time she looked at him. Julian opened his eyes, the blue of them dimmed by medication, but brightening when they met hers. "You're here," he rasped. Cassie blinked back tears and smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." Her voice trembled as she told him about the overnight drive from Pennsylvania, about the moment she saw him still and unconscious in the ICU. "I sang to you," she said softly. "Streetlight lullaby. I prayed God would let you hear me, let you stay." Julian listened, a dull ache rising in his chest, but it was softened by warmth. He remembered her voice, distant, like light in a long tunnel, pulling him back from the dark. "You stayed the whole time," he murmured, as if needing confirmation. Cassie nodded, fingers brushing the small wooden cross in her pocket. "I couldn't leave you alone." He reached for her hand. The motion made him wince, but he managed it. "Cassie," he said, his voice raw, "you're here when I have nothing. No power, no reputation. You're my family." His words fell like a prayer, bare and honest. Cassie bowed her head, tears spilling down her cheeks, though her smile bloomed through them. "I wrote that song in the ICU, for you," she admitted. "I didn't realize how much I loved you, until I almost lost you." Julian squeezed her hand gently. His eyes said what his voice couldn't. "I heard you. Your voice was my light." The door opened, breaking the moment. Emma Hayes stepped inside, her blonde hair tied back, her gray suit perfectly pressed. At 38, she was a respected attorney in Boston, always composed, but her eyes now brimmed with concern. "Julian," she said, her tone firm but shaky, "you scared me to death." She leaned down to hug him gently, careful not to jostle his injuries. Julian offered a faint smile. "You got here fast, Emma." Her gaze shifted to Cassie, curious but kind. "And you are—" Julian introduced her without hesitation. "Cassie Monroe. She saved me." Emma gave Cassie a nod of quiet appraisal, then softened. "Thank you," she said. "Rachel told me you've been here since the beginning." Rachel Nguyen, Julian's assistant, entered just behind Emma, holding an iPad and a bouquet of yellow daisies. At 30, she was efficient, loyal, and rarely frazzled. Today, she looked visibly relieved. "Boss," she said with a teasing smile, "don't scare me like that again." She placed the flowers on the table and updated him. "Mike, your driver, has a sprained wrist and some bruises, but he's home resting. He sends his regards." Cassie listened quietly, feeling like she just stepped into another part of Julian's life. Emma sat, recounting how she had flown in the moment she heard. "Our parents have been gone a long time. It's always been just the two of us," she said, looking at her brother. "You've always kept things to yourself. But this time, I really thought I'd lost you." Julian squeezed her hand. "I'm okay, because of Cassie." Emma looked at Cassie with gratitude. "Looks like my brother finally found someone worth trusting." Rachel shifted the conversation to work, explaining that she was coordinating with police about the crash. Moments later, Detective Ramirez arrived, handing Julian a business card. "The brake lines were cut," Ramirez said grimly. "We received an anonymous threat targeting your project. Our prime suspect is Martin Kessler." Julian's expression darkened. He explained how Kessler had manipulated both Elise and Cassie for personal gain. Cassie froze at the name, pain flashing across her face. "We'll help the police," she said firmly. "He's hurt enough people." Julian gave her a look full of respect. Emma nodded. "I'll provide any legal support needed." Once Ramirez and Emma departed, Rachel lingered just long enough to urge Julian to rest. "The company's fine, boss. Just focus on healing," she said, then winked at Cassie before leaving. Silence returned to the room, intimate and still. Julian turned to Cassie, his voice softer. "Your voice didn't just save me, it can inspire others." He proposed that she perform at the Foundation's major upcoming event once he recovered, so the world could hear her gift. Cassie blushed. "I'm not a star, Julian." He smiled faintly, despite the pain. "You're my star." Cassie shared stories of the kids in Pennsylvania, how they were learning chords and writing their first lyrics. Julian listened, his eyes gleaming. "You make me want to live better," he said. Cassie leaned down and kissed his forehead, a soft, reverent touch. "Then you better get well," she whispered. "I still have so many songs for you." She placed her notebook on the bedside table, open to a new song. "In the quiet, I found you." Julian reached out, touching the page. His eyes said he understood. This song belonged to them. Cassie stepped into the hallway, sat on a bench, and whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you, God, for keeping us." Her faith had carried her through fear, and now it lifted her toward hope. Outside the hospital, New York glittered, its lights like scattered notes waiting to be sung. Julian and Cassie had found each other again, fragile but real. And with Cassie's music as their bridge, they would begin anew, trusting that fate and faith would guide their next verse together. You're watching Soul Stories, home of original, heart-touching tales. Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe. This story lives here and only here. Thank you for being with us. Chapter 5. Building a Future Together. 3 months after the accident, New York was wrapped in the golden glow of autumn. Leaves danced across the sidewalks, and the chill in the air carried the scent of change. Julian Hayes, though still walking with a cane, had finally left Mount Sinai and returned to his Manhattan penthouse. The scar on his forehead had faded, but his eyes shone brighter than ever, thanks to Cassie Monroe. She was by his side every day, her guitar slung over her shoulder, her smile like sunlight in every room. Her faith in God and in the destiny that had brought them through darkness was the wind beneath them both. Now, hand in hand, they were rebuilding what had once been broken. Cassie, now a co-founder of Julian's Scholarship Foundation, threw herself into reviving the project. Together, they planned a benefit concert at Lincoln Center, blending music and mission to support underprivileged students. Though nervous, Cassie agreed to headline the event, bringing Streetlight Lullaby and a new song, Quiet Light, to the stage. Julian, still in recovery, managed the work from home, with Rachel, his steadfast assistant, handling logistics. Emma, Julian's sister, flew in from Boston to provide legal support, ensuring the foundation ran smoothly. Each morning, Cassie arrived at Julian's penthouse with coffee from their favorite Williamsburg cafe and her lyric notebook in hand. They sat by the window overlooking Central Park, talking about the foundation and about the future. Julian, once guarded, opened up more each day, telling her stories of his childhood with Emma, playing piano in their parents' home in Connecticut. Cassie spoke of writing songs in her Brooklyn apartment to keep the pain at bay. "I think God gave me music," she whispered one morning, fingers touching the cross in her pocket, "so I could find you." Julian smiled, lacing his fingers with hers. "And I thank him for that." One crisp afternoon, they walked slowly through Central Park, leaves falling like golden confetti around them. Julian's steps were careful but sure. They paused at Bow Bridge, where sunlight shimmered on the water like scattered notes. Julian, in a soft navy sweater, reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver ring, engraved with two simple words, "First kiss." His eyes met hers, steady and sincere. "Cassie," he said, voice low, "our first kiss started as a dare, but it became the beginning of everything. If that was chapter 1, would you write the rest of our story with me?" Cassie blinked, her eyes filling with tears. She thought of that night at the gala, of his voice in the ICU calling her family, of his hand in hers when he came back to life. She nodded, voice trembling. "Yes, Julian, forever." He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, clumsily with the cane, but with all the warmth of a man reborn. They kissed, gentle, deep, like a prayer answered. Cassie whispered, "Thank you, God, for bringing us here." Julian kissed her forehead. "And for bringing me you." Back at the penthouse, Rachel was waiting with news from Detective Ramirez. "The police found evidence," she said, handing Julian an iPad. "A former employee of Kessler confessed. He hired someone to sabotage your brakes." Emma arrived moments later, adding, "I've spoken with attorneys in New York. Kessler won't walk away from this." Julian squeezed Cassie's hand, his expression resolute. "He hurt both of us," he said. "Now, we end this." Cassie nodded, a sense of peace washing over her. The ghost of Martin Kessler no longer held power over them. The night of the Lincoln Center concert arrived like a hush before a song. Cassie stood backstage, clutching her guitar, heart pounding. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair loose, her nerves electric. Julian sat in the front row beside Emma and Rachel. His eyes held pride, reverence, love. Mike, his driver, his arm fully healed, was there too, clapping enthusiastically. As the lights dimmed and then rose, Cassie stepped onto the stage. She opened with Streetlight Lullaby. Under streetlights were just strangers. The audience fell into reverent silence, then erupted into applause. She followed with Quiet Light, the song she'd written in the hospital. "In the quiet, I found you, through the darkness. Faith pulled through." Her lyrics told their story, from an impulsive kiss to a confession beside a hospital bed. By the final note, the crowd was on its feet, many with tears in their eyes. Julian's heart swelled. The press later called her an indie voice with soul, the future of New York music. But for Cassie, the only review that mattered was the look in Julian's eyes. "You are my everything." After the show, they hosted a small gathering at the penthouse. Emma raised her glass, teasing, "I never thought my buttoned-up brother would get engaged to a rising star." Rachel grinned. "I bet Mike didn't see it coming either. He's been retelling that romantic hospital saga all week." Mike shrugged from the corner. "I just drive the car, but I knew she was special from day one." Cassie blushed, leaning into Julian's shoulder. He kissed her hair and whispered, "You make everything better." When the guests had left, Julian and Cassie stood at the window, gazing down at Central Park. She strummed a few gentle chords on her guitar, a new melody humming to life, one still without lyrics. Julian wrapped his arms around her from behind, his voice soft. "Write this one for us." Cassie nodded, her fingers brushing the ring marked "First Kiss," and in her heart, she whispered, "Thank you, God, for giving us a future." Her music, now part of their shared life, flowed like the city lights below, guiding them forward. Hand in hand, they faced the unknown. With love and faith, nothing could break them. Martin Kessler remained a name in a file, no longer a shadow. Cassie and Julian, bound by music and fate, were writing their next song together. a song called Forever. 1 year after the accident, Manhattan shimmered in lights for the charity gala at the same glass tower in Midtown, where Cassie Monroe and Julian Hayes had first met. The marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers that sparkled like musical notes, and the laughter of the elite mingled with the clinking of wine glasses. Cassie stood backstage, dressed in a radiant red gown that hugged her figure, a guitar in her arms and her heart pounding. Tonight she wasn't a bartender. She was the star of the evening, about to perform Forever's song, a piece written about her and Julian's journey, from a daring kiss to a lifelong promise. Julian, fully recovered, stood near the stage, his black tux accentuating his steady frame. The faint scar on his forehead was the only visible trace of the past, but his eyes gleamed as he watched Cassie. Their scholarship fund had now supported hundreds of students, and tonight's gala celebrated that success. Emma sat at the front table, eyes shining with pride. Rachel, ever the multitasker, was overseeing logistics while whispering to Mike, who had returned to work after the crash. "She's going to make everyone cry," Rachel murmured. Mike nodded, smiling. "I knew from the first time I saw her sing." Cassie stepped into the spotlight, her hair cascading over her shoulders. She strummed the first chord, her voice clear and soulful as Forever's song began. "From a dare to a dream, you found me. In the chaos, love crowned me." The lyrics traced their love story, from that impulsive kiss at a gala, to a whispered "I love you" in a hospital room, to the first kiss ring beneath the trees of Central Park. The room stilled. Many reached for tissues as tears welled up. Julian watched, heart full, remembering the first time she sang Streetlight Lullaby. She had cracked open the walls around his heart, and now she was his world. As the final note lingered, the crowd rose to their feet, applause thunderous. Cassie smiled and bowed, but her eyes searched only for Julian. He walked onto the stage, took the microphone, and spoke, his voice low, clear, unwavering. "1 year ago, in this very place, one kiss broke down every wall I had." He turned to her, gaze locked. The audience buzzed, sensing something monumental. He knelt, pulling a gold ring from his jacket, more brilliant than the first, but still engraved with the words, "First Kiss." "Cassie Monroe," he said, "you gave me a family, a song, a life. Will you turn our first kiss into our forever kiss?" Cassie's eyes shimmered with tears. She looked at the man who had once doubted her, nearly lost her, but now stood as her everything. "Yes, Julian," she whispered, "forever." The room erupted. Applause, cheers, a few joyful whistles. Julian slipped the ring onto her finger and rose, pulling her into his arms. They kissed, not as a dare, but as a promise. Cassie whispered, fingers brushing the cross in her dress pocket. "Thank you, God, for him." Julian kissed her forehead and echoed, "And for you." Emma stood, clapping through tears. "My stubborn little brother finally got it right," she said to Rachel, laughing. Rachel raised her phone to capture the moment. "This is definitely going viral." Mike nodded, warm-eyed. "They earned it." In a corner, Lena shouted, "You better get married fast, Monroe." Cassie laughed, leaning into Julian. It felt like the whole world was singing with her. After the proposal, she returned to the stage and sang Quiet Light, the song born in the silence of the ICU. Her voice soared through lyrics of faith and love that had carried them through darkness. The crowd rose again, tears in their eyes. The press later wrote, "Cassie Monroe isn't just a voice, she's the soul of New York." Julian watched from the wings, his heart full. This song, their story, it all proved fate had chosen right. The night wound down, but the joy didn't end. Rachel returned with news. "Detective Ramirez just emailed. They've arrested Martin Kessler. Full confession, solid evidence." Emma, calling from Boston, said firmly, "He won't walk free this time. I'll see to it." Julian squeezed Cassie's hand. "He's the past." Cassie nodded, a sense of release washing over her. Martin Kessler, who once tried to manipulate and destroy, was no longer a shadow in their lives. They stepped out into the night, the city glowing around them like a living symphony. Cassie held Julian's hand, the first kiss ring gleaming in moonlight. They made a quick stop at a nearby recording studio, where Cassie, with help from the Foundation's team, had recorded the final version of Forever's song. When it was released, the track soared up the indie charts, quickly becoming a phenomenon. But to Cassie, the true success was watching Julian listen to it, eyes lit up as if hearing her heart. In the car with Mike driving, they passed Central Park, where Julian had first proposed. He wrapped his arm around her and murmured, "Write a new song for our wedding." Cassie smiled, nodded, and touched the cross at her neck. She whispered silently, "Thank you, God, for this future." Her music now pulsed with their shared life, like the lights of New York, guiding them forward. With faith, with love, and with melody, they were ready for forever.